Greetings and welcome. We are in 303 and we turn now back to Mr. Conrad's Unstoppable Volume, Lesson 30. I hope that you have your journals open right now. Let's go ahead and observe the focus information that's provided there. Let's write this one down again, or circle it, or note it in our journals. When you hear what is right, make it a part of your life. This is an interesting observation. We'll be making some important observations in this reading about the follow-up to the Clint Haskins story that we were reading about in Lesson 29. By the way, just so you know, apparition here means ghost. For example, when we study Shakespeare's Hamlet, at the opening of the play, the ghost is actually in Shakespeare's folio called an apparition. All right, you'll understand maybe why this is significant here in a bit. One Friday, I hope you're reading with me, page 100, read along with me. One Friday, shortly after the emotionally draining experience of Clint's bond hearing, I needed to teach my students the lesson I learned there. My students needed to hear it too. I started that Friday story by holding up a small pebble in front of the class. Have any of you ever thrown one of these into a lake, I asked. Every student raised their hand. What happened when you did that, I questioned, as if not knowing the answer. Made a splash, one student yelled out. I pointed the pebble right at him and said, that's right. After leading the class with several more questions, we determined the size of the splash was in direct correlation to the size of the rock. The bigger the rock, the bigger the splash. Smaller the rock, smaller the splash. If you agree with this, raise your hand, I challenged. Every hand in the class was raised. Some kids were looking at each other like, duh, everybody knows that. Some were wondering, where's he going with this? They were about to find out. What happens next? What happens after the splash, I asked. Another student called out, ripples. Once again, you're correct, I exclaimed, getting more excited. I went on to explain that those ripples are caused by the displacement of water made by the rock. How far do those ripples go across the lake? Now my questions were getting harder. Not quite sure he had the right answer. One student answered sheepishly, all the way across the whole lake. That student was right. The ripples go clear across the entire lake. Obviously, you can't always detect them once they reach the other side, but they do go clear across. I explained to the class that their actions are kind of like that rock. Big actions create a big splash. Small actions create a small splash. However, the size of the splash isn't necessarily as significant as the ripple effect. Your actions of today will ripple out and can affect your life years from now in a negative or positive way, depending on your splash. Just to return to it, because it's such a significant idea for Mr. Conrad and his Unstoppable program. Again, big actions create a big splash. Small actions create a small splash. The size of the splash isn't nearly as significant as the ripple effect. Your actions of today will ripple out and can affect your life years from now in a negative or positive way, depending on your splash. I then told my class the story of Clint Haskins. He was one of the best kids I ever taught. Polite, respectful, athletic. He was the all-American boy. But Clint had 3 small splashes earlier in his life that had rippled clear across the lake and were affecting him now. Those 3 small splashes were his MIPs, minor in possession, he was cited for, and which were part of his record. At the time of the MIP, Clint had no idea that the ripple effect would play a major role in the judge's decision to set a cash bond of $100,000. How many of your parents have $100,000 in cash and can bail you out of jail? Not a single hand was raised. Okay, then let's make sure the splash you create is a positive one so that the ripple effects help you to make you unstoppable, I challenged. Immediately after dismissing the class to go to work in the shop, I looked up and saw a figure at my classroom door. He appeared like an apparition. It was Clint Haskins. With the small town support of family and friends, Dale and Len Haskins came up with $100,000 in cash. Clint was free until his trial, and he came to talk with me. We went into my office. Clint was back in the very classroom where he'd spent 4 joyful and memorable years. Our reunion quickly became emotional. Clint thanked me for taking the stand at his bond hearing. He told me he listened to every Friday story during his 4 years, yet this still happened. We should point out, knowledge is not enough, right? I told him that nobody is perfect, including me. We all make mistakes. Why he was involved in such a tragedy, Lord only knows. We may never know why it happened. Clint talked of the remorse he had for the 8 cross-country kids, how he thought about them constantly, especially around the University of Wyoming campus. After his release from jail, Clint continued to take his classes at the same university that was deeply mourning the loss of 8 beloved student-athletes. I couldn't even imagine what he was going through or the courage it took to go to those classes. Eventually, the subject of his upcoming trial came up. Clint said there wasn't going to be a trial. When I asked him why, he said he wasn't going to put all those families through the emotions of a trial. He didn't want to put his family through it either. I'm going to plead guilty, he said. I told Clint that one thing no one ever could take from you is your character. It sounds like you're keeping yours, I said. On February 7, 2002, Clint took the stand during a 15-minute hearing. His attorney asked Clint if he was responsible for the head-on collision on September 16, 2001 that killed 8 University of Wyoming cross-country athletes. Clint recalled the crash in tears. While looking at all of the family members of the victims, Clint told them, if I had not driven, they would still be alive. Clint is currently serving a 14 to 20-year prison sentence at the Wyoming State Penitentiary in Rawlins, Wyoming. I went to visit Clint in prison. I'll never forget all the little kids I saw that day who were visiting their dads. It was there in prison that we discussed Clint becoming part of my program, The Unstoppable You. Clint wanted to try to make something positive out of this tragedy. We agreed he would speak to students via a live phone call from prison. It would take a second visit to prison to convince Clint to let the world hear a message from Mom. Finally, on page 103, make sure your actions of today cause a splash that will ripple out and help create the unstoppable you. I should point out this idea about the ripple effect. I've often said this when I talk, that, and I've already said this to you, a minor in possession doesn't mean you're caught. A minor in possession simply means that you're a minor engaging in illicit activity, drugs, alcohol. And I've often noticed students sometimes, they'll kind of make this hand signal. You know what I'm talking about? This hand signal, right, when they're talking about what they're about to do. I've often pointed this out, and it blows the minds of a lot of my older students. You never learn to make that hand signal on your own. Someone older, think about what I'm saying. Someone older showed you that hand signal. That's how you learned it. Which is an interesting observation, because if you're an individual who makes that hand signal and some young kid watches, and then that kid goes out, oh wait, and engages in some kind of MIP, question, are you responsible for whatever it is that individual does? By the way, the answer to that is, you bet. That's the ripple effect. That's the ripple effect. I can guarantee you that Clint Haskins learned before his 3 caught MIPs from somebody older. The old teaches the young. That's how you became who you are. That's how the next generation will become who they are. It's a heavy responsibility. It's a challenge, no question. Let's make a couple of quick observations for your journals really quickly. 1, knowledge. Notice, knowledge is not enough. Clint Haskins sat for 3 or 4 years. He sat and listened. He went through all of the programs. You have to do something with the knowledge. That's the challenge. Number 2, let's point this out because this is foundational to the unstoppable idea as well. Notice that when bad stuff happens, and clearly we're talking about one here, notice that the instincts are to ask the question, why did this happen to me? This is, of course, a bad question. It's a useless question. You always come up with another question for the answer to that one. We have to learn, write this in your journals, we have to learn to ask a different question. Not why did this happen to me, but rather, why did this happen for me? Notice young Haskins, knowing he had made a monumental mistake, wanted to try to help, to do something positive out of the terrible experience. To ask the question, why did this happen for me? Takes an experience that obviously is really terrible and makes it possible for you to learn something from the experience. Number 3, all actions have consequences. Remember Tennyson's Ulysses when he says, I am part of all that I have met. There are no insignificant moments in your life. I would write that down in my journals as well. There are no insignificant moments in your life. Every single moment, every single event, in the end, matters. Finally, let's make a quick observation about the ripple effects. As you're finishing high school and your high school career, what kind of ripple effect have you left? What is the legacy of your life, and what can you do with today and tomorrow? Especially as it relates to those middle schoolers that are watching. How are they going to learn how to be high school students? They're watching you. The ripple effect is important. Your ability to accept that is a really important next step for you. And of course, as Mr. Conrad will call it, to become unstoppable. Thank you.